All right, welcome back. So today we are going to begin Unit 3, Topic 3. We're still looking at empires, however, this time we are examining belief systems. So for this thematic learning focus, it is going to focus in on culture. And by the end of this lesson, I want you to explain continuity and change within the various belief systems during the period from 1450 to 1750. Historically, the Protestant Reformation marked a break with existing Christian traditions, and both the Protestant and Catholic Reformations contributed to the growth of Christianity. Political rivalries between the Ottoman and the Safavid empires intensified the split within Islam between the Sunni and the Shia. Sikhism developed in South Asia in a context of interactions between Hinduism and Islam. So let's contextualize the Protestant Reformation. Here on this slide, this is just a quick overview of the Christian church in Europe prior to the Protestant Reformation. The big takeaway from this slide should be that Christianity grew in scope and power until it came to be the dominating power in Europe, more powerful than any regional monarchies. Then several events, these are just some highlights, began to change the power of the church. As feudalism declined and monarchies grew stronger, it set the stage for power shifts away from the church. When the plague swept through Europe, the event had a few important effects. Number one, it killed many high-ranking members of the church. And two, it led people to question why God would allow some to live and others to die, creating doubts within Christianity. From the 13th to the 16th century, the Renaissance in Europe brought new ideas like humanism, in which people began to think that they could determine their own fates rather than their lives being determined by a religious doctrine. Conflicts, they emerged within the church, such as the Western Schism, in which two separate popes, one in Avignon, France, and the other in Rome, attempted to claim the title. Through all of this, awareness of corruption within the church developed, setting the stage for the Protestant Reformation. So let's examine the power of the church. So far in this course, we have learned about Europe in the context of feudalism and many small kingdoms. What is important to understand about the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy is that this entity represented Europe's first major unifying force. The church was highly influential across Europe and was more powerful than most European governments who had armies by the 13th century. And that leads us to splits in the church. Here we highlight two changes within the Catholic Church. In Unit 1, we briefly touched on the Great Schism of 1054, which resulted in the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity, primarily practiced in Eastern Europe or Russia. While we are not worried about Eastern Orthodoxy in this unit, it serves as an example of both continuity and change. The Roman Catholic Church continued on after the Great Schism, and the Eastern Orthodox Church represents a change in Christianity. We also have the Western Schism in 1378. From 1309, the papacy had been located in Avignon, France, as opposed to its original location in Rome. In 1378, Pope Gregory XI returned to Rome, but this resulted in a second line of popes, which remained in France. From 1378 to 1417, there were two opposing popes. So examining the effects of Western Schism. The Western Schism split Europe's allegiance between the Avignon and Roman papacies. This was obviously problematic for the church to have two popes both claiming supreme authority, and resulted in a reform movement known as conciliarism. Essentially, this resulted in the erosion of power of the pope and placed more decision-making power in the hands of ecumenical council. That's a council made up of high-ranking church members. This is an important change that helps us understand the Protestant Reformation later, as it highlights problems from within the Roman Catholic Church itself. What I really want to emphasize here is that some power moved out of the Pope's hand as a result of the Western Schism. So, humanism and Renaissance. One of the big shifts in Europe during this time period was the Renaissance. Historians still disagree about how to characterize the Eastern Renaissance in terms of dates, but for our purposes, it was a long-term transformation and revival of ideas that took place primarily in the 15th and 16th centuries. We most often tend to associate the Renaissance with artwork, which pictured here is the School of Athens by Italian Renaissance artist Raphael. While there are many avenues of the Renaissance that could be explored, we are going to focus in on one major new idea that surfaced during this time: humanism. Humanism was a cultural and intellectual movement that emphasized the study of classical literature, art, and philosophy, particularly from ancient Greece and Rome. This focus on classical learning encouraged critical thinking and a questioning attitude, which in turn led to a more critical examination of the practices and teachings of the Church. Humanist scholars emphasized the importance of individual reason and the pursuit of knowledge, which often clashed with the Church's authority and dogma. This intellectual movement contributed to the Reformation in the 16th century, but it's important to note that many humanists were not trying to break from the Church, but rather trying to clean up the Church. Erasmus of Rotterdam. Erasmus was a Renaissance humanist who was an influential figure in the lead-up to the Protestant Reformation. He himself was a Catholic priest who recognized some of the brewing problems within the Church. He did not want to break off from the Catholic Church to form a new branch of Christianity, but rather he wanted to see reform from within to clean up the corruption and abuses of the Church. He was considered to be center in the conflict between the Church and those that wanted to break from the Church. In addition to his ideas about reform, he translated copies of the Bible into Latin and Greek. This is significant because it contributed to a wider circulation of biblical knowledge, something that helped fuel the Reformation. And that turns us to the corruption within the Catholic Church. Indulgences were granted by the Church as a way to reduce or eliminate the temporal punishment associated with sin. This reduction was often tied to specific acts of piety, such as prayer, pilgrimage, or charitable donations. By performing these acts or making offerings, individuals could obtain indulgences, which were seen as a way to expedite their spiritual purification. In the years leading up to Protestant Reformation, indulgences could simply be purchased, and this practice was seen as highly corrupt. Simony involves the exchange of money, goods, and other valuable items for positions or privileges within the Church. This practice was considered a grave sin because it corrupted the spiritual integrity of the Church, turning sacred roles and functions into commodities for personal gain. Historically, simony was a problem in the medieval Church, where some individuals sought to buy positions like bishoprics or abbacies. This led to concerns about the moral and spiritual quality of clergy appointed via simony. So here we got a slide, and this is a primary source image. What do you think the purpose of these illustrations are. I want you to take a minute, pause the slide, and look at the left image really closely, and then look at the right image very closely. And I want you to think about these questions as you examine these images. What is the first image on the left saying about the Pope and the Church? What is the second image on the right saying about indulgences? Who does the second image represent? What is he wearing? How might these images be connected to reform in the Roman Catholic Church? So take a minute, pause the slide, examine the images very closely, and answer those questions real quick. Okay, so hopefully you took some time to look at the image, to ask yourself those questions. These images come from the Bohemian Reformation in Central Europe, which is now present-day Czech Republic. The Bohemian Reformation predates the Protestant Reformation and was a 200-year-long struggle that resulted in the first national church. That's the church associated with a country or region, separate from the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, and it was the first apocalyptic and pacifist Protestant church. This movement criticized the wealth and power of the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope, the bishops, and the cardinal in the first picture represent a decadent church, and the second image links the sale of indulgences directly to Satan. They preached in a common language that was accessible to everyday people, and they emphasized the connection of man directly to God, as opposed to the need to access God through a member of the church. These ideas behind the Bohemian Reformation share commonalities with a larger Protestant Reformation and the other new churches that would branch off as a result. For a closer look at the Bohemian Reformation, in class we will be examining a reading with questions as part of this lesson. So let's talk about Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther is one of the most important figures in the Protestant Reformation. He famously wrote 95 theses, a list of criticisms and objections against the Catholic Church's abuse and corruption, including the practice of selling indulgences. He posted these theses on the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany, sparking the Protestant Reformation. One major difference in Martin Luther's belief from the Catholic churches is the idea that salvation comes through, quote unquote, through faith in God's grace alone, meaning that a person cannot buy their way into salvation or do penance for salvation. So that's going to lead us into this Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation was a relatively widespread movement that called for reforms of the Catholic Church. The Reformation led to many significant changes, including new branches of Christianity that were completely separate from the Roman Catholic Church and who do not recognize the Pope as the highest religious authority. Three major Protestant Christian religions to arise from the Reformation are Lutheranism, Calvinism, and the Anglican Church. But more on these on the next slide. So let's take a look at Lutheran, Calvinism, and the Anglican Church. You do not really need to memorize details of these Christian denominations, but you should be able to name a few new denominations that resulted from the Protestant Reformation and the general time in which these breaks from the Catholic Church occurred. You will not be asked to explain doctrinal differences between the new Christian religions and the Roman Catholic Church, but I have included a few points just to emphasize that these were new religions with beliefs that differed from Catholicism. So that takes us to 16th century European religions. The boundaries on this map are approximate, and it's important to note that these are areas that do not represent all denominations, but rather the major pockets of the three biggest Protestant churches from the Reformation. The green line designates the Ottoman Empire, which was a mix of Islam, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Calvinism at this time. Ignoring the Ottoman Empire, you would have to identify continuities and change in Europe from before the Reformation to the late 1500s, which is represented on this map. The Council of Trent. So the Council of Trent, convened by the Roman Catholic Church in the mid-16th century, stands as a pivotal moment in the history of Christianity. Emerging as a response to the Protestant Reformation, this ecclesiastical assembly, which convened intermediately from 1545 to 1563 in the Italian town of Trento, which is modern-day Trent, aimed to address and rectify the profound religious, theological, and disciplinary challenges that had arisen within the Catholic Church. The council was a response to the seismic shifts brought about by reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, who had raised poignant questions about the Church's doctrine, practices, and moral authority. In this crucible of doctrinal debate and ecclesiastical reform, the Council of Trent sought not only to reaffirm traditional Catholic teachings, but also to address issues of clerical misconduct and corruption. So let's talk about the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, spanning from 1618 to 1648, was a brutal and devastating conflict that ravaged Europe. It is intricately related to the Protestant Reformation, as it emerged as a culmination of religious tensions that had simmered since Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517. The war primarily pitted Catholic forces, led by the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire, against Protestant states and their allies. It served as a violent manifestation of the deep-seated religious divisions that the Reformation had sown across the continent, with Protestantism challenging the long-standing dominance of the Catholic Church. As religious fervor mixed with political ambitions, the conflict escalated, resulting in immense suffering for civilian populations and substantial changes to the political landscape of Europe. Pictured here is the sack of Magdeburg, the Magdeburg Maidens. This is an 1866 painting by Edward Steinbruck. The sacking of Magdeburg, which is a city in Germany, is considered to be the worst massacre of the 30 Years' War, and it included thousands of civilian deaths and torture. I want you to take a moment and notice what you notice about this photo. Namely, who is being attacked? What is the general setting? I want you, once again, take a minute, pause it, examine the painting very closely. Who's being attacked, and what's the general setting? So hopefully you paused the video and tried to take a moment to examine the painting and figure out what's going on here. You should be able to point out it appears that the unarmed woman and young child in the left side are the ones who are under attack. So what does this say about the event being depicted? Magdeburg councilman Otto von Guericke said of the sacking, "When civilians ran out of things to give the soldiers, the misery really began. For then the soldiers began to beat, frighten, and threaten to shoot, skewer, hang, etc. the people. Of the city's 25,000 inhabitants, 20,000 of them were killed in this event. This is one of many conflicts that raged across Europe in a series of wars that resulted from the Reformation tensions." European Wars of Religion. The 30 Years' Wars is the most famous of the European wars of religion. Here is a list of some of the major wars in various regions which took place between Protestants and Catholics. While each of these wars was fought over religious differences, some were also political in nature. The 30 Years' War, for example, was not only a clash between Protestants and Catholics, but it also turned into a political war between the French and the House of Habsburg. The War of Three Kingdoms had a strong national element to it, and the 80 Years' War was fought over religion and taxation, which eventually became the War for Independence. The important takeaway here is that the Reformation sparked many wars throughout Europe that were religious in nature. So that takes us to the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Reformation. The Protestant Reformation and the spread of new non-Catholic Christian religions in Europe led to the Counter-Reformation, sometimes called the Catholic Reformation. The Church implemented some reforms and attempted to combat the spread of Protestant religions. This era began with the Council of Trent and ended when the European Wars of Religion, the 30 Years' War, French Wars of Religion, etc., ended. The goal of the Counter-Reformation was to combat the spread of Protestantism by reforming abuses within the Catholic Church, increasing missionary activity to further spread Catholicism, and increasing Inquisition efforts to suppress heretical beliefs and reinforce Catholic doctrine. Also included censorship and burning of Protestant books. The art style known as Baroque emerges during the Counter-Reformation, which was a style that was explicitly Catholic, often characterized by a heightened religious intensity and awe-inspiring detail. Pictured on the right here is a 1624 painting titled Adoration of the Magi by Peter Paul Rubens, a prominent Baroque Counter-Reformation artist. So we also see the Sunni-Shia split. Switching gears from Christianity to Islam, we are going to look at a major split within Islam that affected the Ottomans and Safavids, known as the Sunni-Shia split or the Sunni-Shia divide. This split occurred well before the period of the 1450-1750 era, unlike the Protestant Catholic split. In the city of Medina in the Arabian Peninsula, which was the epicenter of early Islamic history, disputes arose over leadership succession after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE. Sunni Muslims believed the first four caliphs after the Prophet Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, were the rightful leaders chosen by consensus. They viewed leadership as a matter of competence and consensus within the Muslim community. Shia Muslims, on the other hand, believed that leadership should be hereditary, and that Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad, was the rightful first leader, the Imam, after the Prophet Muhammad. They hold that leadership should have continued with Ali's bloodline, so the biggest reason for the split revolved around whether or not Islamic leadership should have been hereditary or determined by consensus. So here we have a primary source, and this appears in your guided notes, on the Sunni-Shia conflict in the Safavid and Ottoman empires. I want you to pause the lecture at this point, and in your guided notes, I want you to read through and annotate this primary source. This is an excerpt from a travel log of Don Juan of Persia, also known as Uruk Bek, in 1604. He was a Safavid official under Shah Abbas I, who later settled in Spain. So take a minute, pause the slide, read and annotate this primary source in your guided notes, and then come back when you are done. Okay, so hopefully you finished doing that. Now we're going to go on to the questions that you're going to... Okay, so using the primary source that you read and annotated on the previous slide, I want you to try and answer the following questions. If there's a spot for it in your guided notes, answer them there. If not, answer them in the margins. Number one, which branch of Islam does the Safavid Empire follow? 2, was Shah Abbas, according to the source, tolerant of Sunni Islam? Number 3, who controlled the city of Constantinople at the time this was written in 1604? And 4, why do you think Shah Abbas was so confident that Christian European powers would ally with him to attack the Turks in Constantinople? Be prepared to discuss these questions in class. We will discuss them in class, so take the time to answer them now so you have answers to them in class. So let's discuss that Ottoman-Safavid conflicts. In the 16th century, the Ottomans and the Safavids were at war in the regions in which they shared borders. Part of these conflicts was connected to religion, as the Safavids were staunchly Shia Muslims and forced conversions of any Sunni Muslims in their territory. The Ottoman Empire was primarily Sunni Muslim and had more tolerance than the Safavids for religious diversity, although that dried up over time with new rulers. Ottoman-Safavid War of 1623 through 1639 was the final war in this series of conflicts between the two empires and centered around control of Mesopotamia. The war began in 1623 when the Ottoman forces, led by Sultan Murad IV, launched an invasion of Safavid territories in the Caucasus and Mesopotamia areas. The Ottomans made significant gains during this phase, capturing several key cities. Several years of conflict and territory gains and losses occurred, with both empires exhausted by the prolonged conflict and recognizing the futility of continued warfare. The Treaty of Zuhab was signed in 1639. Under this treaty, the Ottomans retained control over most of Mesopotamia, while the Safavids regained some lost territories. The border between the two empires was redefined along the western Zagros Mountains. The Ottoman-Safavid War of 1623 through 1639 reaffirmed the stability of the Ottoman and the Safavid borders for several decades as both empires turned their attention to other areas. Additionally, it contributed to the religious and sectarian divide between Sunni and Shia Islam in the Middle East, which continues to influence the region to this day. Pictured here on the left is Suleiman the Magnificent marching with his army in modern-day Azerbaijan in 1554 at the end of the Ottoman-Safavid War. So let's move to Sikhism, or Sikhi. Sikh is pronounced like the English word, Sikh. Sikhism is one of the most recent major world religions. It originated in Punjab in 1499 with the teachings of Guru Nanak, pictured on the right. It is now the fifth largest religion with somewhere between 25 to 30 million followers. While it developed in an area that was predominantly Hindu and Muslim, it is very important not to propagate the common misconception that Sikhism is just a blend of Hinduism and Islam. It was influenced by some traditions from these religions, but it is its own religion with a unique set of beliefs, traditions, and history. The symbol on this slide contains the Punjab phrase Ik Onkar, which translates approximately to "there is only one God." This is a central tenet of Sikhism, which is a monotheistic religion, meaning one God, unlike Hinduism, which is many gods. So the philosophy and teachings of Sikhism. Here is a simplified list of some of the major beliefs and teachings of Sikhism. It is not necessary for you to memorize this list, but it is important that you know that Sikhism is a monotheistic religion, one God, and that it has its own scripture. Guru Granth Sahib, written by the last Guru by the same name. Articles of Faith. The 5 Ks of Sikhism are symbols of the faith manifested by each Sikh. They do not cut their hair, and this is why the men, they typically wrap their hair in a turban called a pagri, and the women cover their heads with long scarves called the chuni or dupatta. One notable symbol of Sikhs is the kirpan, a small sword or dagger carried for the purpose of protection of both the self and those who cannot protect themselves. Pictured here is Bijla Singh holding a traditionally long-length talwar kirpan. So let's discuss Sikhism in the Mughal Empire. The Islamic Mughal Empire is often introduced as a religiously tolerant empire, especially in comparison to some of its Islamic counterparts like the Safavids, who were generally not tolerant of other religions. We have previously learned that Akbar the Great, pictured here riding an elephant, embraced Hindus and Muslims alike and made a point to put Hindu officials in high-ranking government positions. He felt it was better to bring Hindus and Muslims together, and that acceptance extended to other faiths such as Sikhism. Akbar's son, Jahangir, pictured here, succeeded Akbar as the 4th Mughal emperor from 1605 to 1627. His reign marked a change in Mughal religious tolerance. Jahangir and high-ranking members of his court wanted the empire to be a strictly Muslim state, and Hindus and Jains were persecuted under his rule. Guru Arjan was arrested by Jahangir under the pretext that he was part of a rebellion that had taken place. While Guru Arjan was in prison, it became clear that Jahangir mistook him for a Hindu and may not have even been completely aware of the Sikh faith. Guru Arjan became a Sikh martyr when he was executed for his refusal to convert to Islam under Jahangir's direction. This event marked the militarization of the Sikhs. So, Guru Hargobind. As we explore continuity and change in belief systems, it is worth noting a major shift in Sikhism that occurred with the execution of Guru Arjan under Mughal Emperor Jahangir. While Sikhs always had the tradition of carrying a kirpan, that small sword to symbolize willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves, the martyrdom of Guru Arjan moved the Sikh community to become militarized. Guru Arjan's son, Hargobind, was chosen to succeed him as the Sikh Guru. And just several days after this appointment of succession, Guru Arjan was arrested and killed for refusal to convert to Islam. Before his death, he advised his son to build and maintain a Sikh army. His son, the 6th Guru, did so and took 2 swords as symbols of worldly and spiritual power, known as the Miri Puri. Guru Hargobind founded the first Sikh army, which was called Akal Sena, and during his time as Guru, he waged 9 different battles against the Mughal Empire. This is not the end of the story of conflict and change for the Sikhs in Punjab, but this is part of the narrative which illustrates some big changes that occurred in India regarding belief systems during this period. And that's it for topic 3.3. Once again, here are the key ideas that I'd like you to review for this topic. Please make sure to write these down in a separate notebook as kind of like a cheat sheet for review and for your tests so that you know exactly where to look for. These are the key ideas that you need to take away from this lecture. And as always, take a couple minutes to review the AP World History Topic 3.3 Heimler video that will be in the descriptions. Have a great night.